After losing everything, a millionaire turns to alcohol looking for escape in a secluded bar. A mysterious woman shows up, not caring about his status or wealth. If this story got you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Alexander Reed stared at the Manhattan skyline from his penthouse office, watching as the setting sun cast long shadows across the city he had once conquered. At 38, he had built Reed Financial Group into one of the most powerful corporations in America. Now it was crumbling beneath his feet. The headline still burned in his mind: Reed Financial Group implicated in massive fraud scheme. His phone hadn't stopped ringing for days after the news broke. Clients, partners, friends, all demanding explanations he couldn't give because he genuinely didn't know how his company had become the center of such a scandal. "Mr. Reed," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, "the board is waiting in the conference room." Alexander straightened his tie, a habit from years of presenting himself as unshakable. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." He took a final glance at the empire he had built. The gleaming tower with its panoramic views of Central Park, the elegant furnishings that had cost more than most people's homes, the awards lining the walls. By tomorrow, none of it would be his anymore. The board meeting was as brutal as he had expected. 12 faces, once filled with respect and admiration, now regarded him with thinly veiled contempt. The evidence was damning. Someone had been using Reed Financial to funnel money through offshore accounts for years. The SEC investigation was closing in, and the board had decided Alexander would be their sacrificial lamb. "Your resignation, effective immediately, is the only way to salvage what's left of the company's reputation," said Eleanor Wright, the chairwoman who had once been his most steadfast ally. "I had nothing to do with this," Alexander insisted, his voice steady despite the anger boiling inside him. "Someone set me up." "Perhaps," Eleanor replied coldly, "but the public needs a villain and your name is on the building." 3 hours later, Alexander walked out of Reed Tower for the last time, carrying only a small box of personal items. The security guard who had greeted him with respect for the past decade now avoided his gaze. Outside, reporters swarmed like vultures. Flashbulbs blinded him as questions were shouted from all directions. "Mr. Reed, did you know about the fraud? Were you directly involved in the embezzlement scheme? Is it true that the FBI is planning to arrest you?" Alexander pushed through the crowd without a word, sliding into the back of his waiting car. "Just drive," he told his chauffeur. The man hesitated. "Sir, I'm afraid this is my last day. The company—" "Right," Alexander said, the reality of his situation sinking in deeper. "Just take me home, then." His phone buzzed incessantly. Names of people he had once called friends appeared on the screen. Only now they were calling to distance themselves, or worse, to gloat. He switched it off. By the time he reached his Upper East Side apartment, the news of his ousting was everywhere. The doorman, usually effusive in his greetings, simply nodded as Alexander passed. Inside his immaculate apartment, Alexander poured himself a scotch, a 30-year-old Macallan that had cost more than a month's salary for most Americans. The irony wasn't lost on him as he drank it in one burning gulp. What good was wealth when your reputation was destroyed? He spent the night watching his life unravel on every news channel. Financial analysts who had once praised his business, acumen now questioned how no one had seen the obvious signs of corruption. Former employees gave interviews claiming they had always been suspicious of the company's practices. Politicians who had happily accepted his campaign contributions now called for harsher regulations. By morning, his phone had dozens of missed calls, including one from his lawyer advising him to prepare for potential legal action. His financial advisor reported that his assets were being frozen pending investigation. The woman he'd been dating for 6 months sent a text simply saying, "I think we need to take a break." Alexander Reed, who had graced the cover of Forbes twice and been named one of Time's most influential people, was now toxic. Days blurred together. He stopped answering his phone, stopped reading the news, stopped going outside where photographers lurked, hoping to capture the fallen titan at his lowest. His lawyer's updates grew increasingly grim. The investigation was expanding, and though they hadn't found direct evidence linking Alexander to the fraud, the circumstantial case was mounting. "Someone orchestrated this," Alexander told his lawyer during one of their meetings. "Someone who knew exactly how to make it look like I was responsible." "We'll find out who," his lawyer promised, but Alexander could see the doubt in his eyes. A week after his resignation, Alexander received the final blow. His accountant called to inform him that most of his personal wealth was tied up in company stock, which had plummeted to nearly worthless. What wasn't in stocks was being seized or frozen by various authorities. The fortune he had spent 20 years building had evaporated almost overnight. That evening, Alexander stood in his kitchen, staring at the bottle of scotch, his last bottle from a once impressive collection. The emptiness of his apartment echoed the hollowness he felt inside. In all his years of climbing to the top, he had never considered what would happen if he fell. He had associates, not friends, connections, not relationships. His identity had been completely wrapped up in Alexander Reed, financial genius and corporate titan. Now, who was he? The question haunted him as he grabbed the scotch and his coat, heading out into the cool autumn night. He couldn't bear the silence of his apartment anymore, the luxury that now felt like a mockery of everything he'd lost. He walked aimlessly through the city streets, past restaurants where he used to dine, clubs where he'd been welcomed as a VIP, buildings that housed companies he had either partnered with or crushed. None of it meant anything now. Eventually, he found himself in a part of the city he barely recognized, somewhere in the Lower East Side, far from the polished corridors of power he usually frequented. A small, dimly lit bar caught his eye. The sign simply read "The Last Call." It seemed fitting. Inside, the bar was nearly empty. No one looked up when he entered. No one recognized the face that had been plastered across business magazines and news programs. Here, he was just another man looking to drown his sorrows. Alexander took a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the few other patrons. "Scotch," he told the bartender. "Whatever's strongest." As the amber liquid was placed before him, Alexander caught a reflection in the mirror behind the bar, not of himself, but of a woman sitting a few stools away. She was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. There was something in her gaze that seemed to cut through the carefully constructed facade he had maintained, even in his fall. He tried to ignore her, focusing instead on the burning sensation of the scotch as it traveled down his throat. But he could still feel her eyes on him, as if she were waiting for something. When he glanced back up, she had moved closer, occupying the stool next to his. Up close, she was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, dark hair falling, in waves around a face with high cheekbones and the most penetrating eyes he had ever seen. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a dark blue blouse with no visible jewelry or designer labels, nothing like the women he typically associated with. "You look like a man who's lost everything," she said, her voice low and melodic. Alexander let out a bitter laugh. "That obvious, is it? Only to someone who knows what to look for." She extended her hand. "I'm Sophia." Alexander hesitated before taking it. "Alex," he replied, using the shortened version of his name that few people ever heard. Tonight, he didn't want to be Alexander Reed. "Just Alex?" Her lips curved into a slight smile that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "Just Alex," he confirmed, taking another sip of his drink. "And what brings you to this particular circle of hell on a Tuesday night, Sophia?" "The same thing that brings most people to places like this," she replied, escaping something. There was something in her tone, a blend of mystery and vulnerability, that caught Alexander's attention in a way nothing had since his world had collapsed. For the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of interest in something beyond his own misery. "And what would someone like you need to escape from?" he asked, genuinely curious. Sophia's smile deepened, revealing a small dimple in her right cheek. "Buy me a drink, and maybe I'll tell you." Alexander signaled to the bartender. As he ordered, Sophia's drink, a simple gin and tonic, he felt lighter somehow, as if the crushing weight of his disgrace had temporarily lifted. Here in this anonymous bar with this enigmatic woman, he could pretend to be someone else, someone unburdened by scandal and loss. Little did he know that this chance encounter would soon pull him into a web of secrets far more complex than the one that had destroyed his empire. A web where truth and deception were so tightly interwoven that distinguishing between them would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the world he had lost. Hours passed like minutes as Alexander found himself captivated by Sophia. The bar around them had nearly emptied, but neither seemed to notice. 3 drinks in, he had already told her more than he'd intended. Not the specifics of his downfall, but the feeling of it, the vertigo of watching everything you've built disappear. It's like waking up one day and finding out your entire life was written in disappearing ink, he explained, surprised by his own candor. Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. That sounds like something from a self-help book, Alexander scoffed, though without malice. Perhaps, she conceded with a small smile. But that doesn't make it less true. There was something disarming about her, the way she listened without judgment, the slight tilt of her head when he spoke, as if every word mattered. In his former life, Alexander had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His money, his influence, his connections. Sophia seemed to want nothing but his company. Enough about me, he said, refilling their glasses from the bottle they'd switched to. What's your story? Sophia's expression shifted subtly. What makes you think I have a story? Everyone has a story, Alexander replied. And people who come to bars alone on weeknights usually have interesting ones. She traced the rim of her glass with one finger, considering him. I work at a small publishing house. Nothing glamorous. I edit manuscripts, help writers shape their stories. And do you like it, shaping other people's stories? I do, she said, and for the first time real warmth entered her voice. There's something powerful about words, about helping someone find the perfect way to express what they're trying to say. Alexander leaned closer, drawn by her sudden animation. And what about your own story? Do you write? A shadow passed across her face. I used to, not anymore. Why not? Sophia took a long drink before answering. Some stories are better left untold. The cryptic response should have been a warning, but Alexander was too intrigued to heed it. In his inebriated state, the mystery she presented was irresistible, so different from the transparent ambitions of everyone else in his life. I don't believe that, he said, his voice dropping lower. Every story deserves to be told, even the difficult ones. Their eyes locked and something electric passed between them. Later, Alexander would wonder who had moved first, but in the moment it seemed inevitable when their lips met. The kiss was hesitant at first, then deepened with an intensity that surprised them both. When they pulled apart, Sophia looked as startled as he felt. I don't usually do this, she whispered, her composure momentarily fractured. Alexander reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Neither do I, not anymore. It wasn't entirely true. His former life had included plenty of casual encounters, but something about this felt different, less transactional, more real. My apartment is nearby, Sophia said after a moment, the words hanging between them, like a question. Alexander hesitated only briefly before nodding. As they left the bar together, the cool night air cleared his head slightly, but not enough to dissuade him from following her through unfamiliar streets to a modest brownstone. Her apartment was small but comfortable, bookshelves lining every available wall, a worn leather couch, framed prints of abstract art. No photographs, he noticed, no personal mementos. Would you like another drink? She asked, suddenly seeming nervous. No, Alexander said, stepping closer to her. I think we've had enough. The kiss this time was more deliberate, laden with intention. Sophia melted against him, her hands threading through his hair as he backed her toward what he assumed was the bedroom. Everything about her was intoxicating. The faint scent of jasmine on her skin, the soft sounds she made as his lips trailed down her neck, the way her body fit perfectly against his. But when his hands moved to unbutton her blouse, she stilled them with her own. Wait, she breathed. There's something you should know. Alexander pulled back slightly, his heart racing. What is it? Sophia looked up at him. Vulnerability and determination mingled in her expression. I haven't. Understanding dawned slowly through his alcohol-hazed mind. You're a virgin. She nodded, a flush spreading across her cheeks. I know it's unusual, at my age, but there are reasons. Alexander stepped back, trying to process this unexpected revelation. In his former world of transactional relationships and casual affairs, such innocence seemed almost anachronistic. Yet instead of cooling his desire, the knowledge only intensified it. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, he said, surprised by his own sincerity. Relief flickered across her face, followed by something deeper, gratitude, perhaps, or trust. Thank you, but I didn't bring you here under false pretenses. I want to be with you. I just needed you to know. The night that followed was unlike any Alexander had experienced. There was a tenderness to their explorations, a reverence that had been absent from his previous encounters. They didn't consummate their connection in the traditional sense, but what they shared felt more intimate than anything he could remember. When morning came, Alexander woke with a pounding headache and a moment of disorientation. The unfamiliar room slowly came into focus, as did the events of the previous night. Sophia was gone from the bed, but he could hear movement in another part of the apartment. Pulling on his discarded clothes, Alexander made his way to the small kitchen, where he found Sophia preparing coffee. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating her in a way the dim bar lighting and bedroom shadows had not. She wore a simple robe, her hair twisted into a messy knot, and Alexander was struck by how beautiful she was in this unguarded moment. Good morning, she said, offering him a steaming mug. Morning. He accepted the coffee gratefully, taking a long sip before asking the question that had been forming since he woke. Can I ask you something personal? Sophia leaned against the counter, her own mug cradled in her hands. After last night, I think we're past the point of formalities. Why? The question was blunt, but he couldn't find a more delicate way to phrase it. I mean, you're beautiful, intelligent. I can't imagine it's for lack of opportunity. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze drifting to the window. It's complicated. I've got time, Alexander said, surprised to realize it was true. For the first time in weeks, he had nowhere to be, no crisis to manage. Sophia sighed, setting down her coffee. My parents were controlling, especially my father. He had very specific ideas about what a daughter should be, how she should behave. Dating wasn't allowed. Independence wasn't encouraged. Alexander listened, sensing there was more to the story than she was revealing. By the time I got away from them, I had developed defenses, ways to keep people at a distance. Intimacy became something frightening, something that could be used against me. She met his eyes again. It wasn't a moral or religious choice, it was self-preservation. And last night? Alexander asked softly. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Last night was me choosing to let someone in, even if just a little. The admission stirred something in him, a protectiveness, a desire to be worthy of such trust. In the harsh light of day, with his hangover pulsing behind his eyes, Alexander knew he should leave, go back to his empty apartment and the ruins of his life. Sophia represented a complication he couldn't afford, yet he found himself saying, "Can I see you again?" Surprise flickered across her face, followed by hesitation. Are you sure that's what you want? Last night you were in a dark place. I was convenient. No, Alexander said firmly. You were many things last night, but convenient wasn't one of them. Their laughter broke the tension, and for a moment, Alexander could almost forget the disaster his life had become. Here in this small sunlit kitchen with this enigmatic woman, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. As he left her apartment an hour later with her number in his phone and plans to meet for dinner, Alexander didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, didn't see the man inside taking photographs of him leaving Sophia's building, didn't realize that his chance encounter was about to become the linchpin in a conspiracy far greater than he could imagine. Back in his own apartment, the reality of his situation reasserted itself quickly. More messages from his lawyer. The investigation was intensifying, and they wanted him to come in for questioning. His financial advisor had resigned, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. His bank had frozen his remaining accounts. Alexander sank onto his couch, the brief respite of the morning evaporating. He should be focusing on salvaging what was left of his reputation, his assets. Instead, he found his thoughts returning to Sophia, her mysterious smile, her surprising revelation, the way she had looked at him as if seeing beyond his disgrace to something underneath. He picked up his phone, intending to call his lawyer back. Instead, he found himself scrolling to Sophia's number. His thumb hovered over it for a moment before he set the phone down. Too soon. Too desperate. Instead, he opened his laptop and did something he had avoided for days. He searched his own name. The results were predictably brutal. Thousands of articles about the scandal, analyses of his fall from grace, speculation about his involvement. But one headline caught his attention. Reed Financial Collapse, the Inside Job. The article was more detailed than most, citing anonymous sources who claimed the fraud had been orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of the company's operations, someone who had deliberately structured the scheme to implicate Alexander. The evidence suggests that Mr. Reed was not the architect of the fraud, but its target, the journalist wrote. The question remains, who wanted Alexander Reed destroyed and why? It was the first piece Alexander had seen that suggested his innocence. He scrolled to the author's name, S. Morgan. Something about the initial nagged at him, a connection his mind was trying to make but couldn't quite complete. His phone buzzed with a text message. Sophia. Still on for dinner tonight? I know a place where no one will recognize you. Alexander smiled despite himself. He started to type a response, then paused, looking back at the article on his screen. S. Morgan, Sophia. The timing of their meeting, her unexpected interest in him. Could it be coincidence? Or was there something more to the mysterious woman who had appeared precisely when he was at his lowest? With a sudden determination, Alexander began a new search, not for his own name this time, but for hers. What he would discover would change everything, not just about Sophia, but about the conspiracy that had destroyed his life and the unexpected path to redemption that lay ahead. Alexander's search for information about Sophia yielded surprisingly little. No social media profiles, no professional websites, nothing that would give him insight into who she really was. The only Sophia Morgan he could find who might match was listed as a contributing writer for several small publications, but with no photograph or biography. The lack of digital footprint was unusual in this age of oversharing. It could be coincidence, perhaps she was simply private, or it could be deliberate obscurity. His dinner with Sophia was scheduled for 8 o'clock at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. Alexander had spent the afternoon in tense meetings with his lawyer, discussing strategy for the upcoming questioning. The authorities were building a case, and while they didn't have enough yet for an arrest, the noose was tightening. They're looking for someone to blame, his lawyer had explained. And you're the perfect candidate. Now as Alexander stepped into the dimly lit restaurant, his mind was churning with suspicions and questions. Sophia was already there, seated at a corner table, wearing a simple black dress that somehow made her more striking than women he'd known who spent thousands on designer clothes. You came, she said, with what appeared to be genuine surprise as he sat across from her. Did you think I wouldn't? She shrugged slightly. You seemed distracted when you left this morning. Second thoughts, perhaps? Not about seeing you again, Alexander replied, studying her face for any hint of deception. But I have been thinking about our meeting. The timing of it. Something flickered in her eyes. Caution, maybe. What about the timing? It's an interesting coincidence that you happened to be in that particular bar on the night I wandered in. Sophia took a sip of her wine, her expression carefully neutral. Life is full of coincidences, Alex. Some of them change everything. Before. He could press further. The waiter arrived to take their order. Alexander chose without really looking at the menu, his focus entirely on the woman across from him. When they were alone again, he decided on directness. Are you S. Morgan, the journalist who wrote about Reed Financial being targeted? The question hung between them for a long moment. Then Sophia set down her glass, her composure intact, but her eyes wary. Yes, she admitted. I freelance for several publications. That was one of my pieces. So you knew who I was when we met, Alexander said, a statement rather than a question. Yes, she said again, but that's not why I approached you. Then why did you? Sophia hesitated, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. I've been investigating the Reed financial scandal for months, before it even became public. I have sources. What sources? Alexander interrupted. I can't reveal them, she said firmly. But they've provided information suggesting that what happened to your company wasn't just corporate fraud. It was a targeted attack. Alexander leaned forward, his suspicions temporarily overridden by hunger for information. By whom? And why? That's what I'm still trying to piece together, but I believe it involves people close to you, people you trust. The statement hit Alexander like a physical blow. He had suspected as much. The fraud had required intimate knowledge of the company's operations, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way his own speculations hadn't. You knew all this when we met, he said, his voice hardening. Was last night research for your next article? The Fallen Titans Drunken. Confessions! Hurt flashed across Sophia's face. No, that's not what happened. Then what did happen? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you used me. It wasn't like that, she insisted, her composure cracking slightly. Yes, I recognized you in the bar. Yes, I approached you initially because I was interested in your story. But what happened between us? She paused, seeming to search for words. That wasn't professional. It was personal. Alexander wanted to believe her. The connection he had felt with her had seemed genuine, unlike anything he'd experienced in his calculated world of business relationships. Why should I trust you, he asked, the question more vulnerable than he had intended. Sophia reached across the table, her hand covering his. Because I'm trying to help you clear your name, and because what I told you about myself, about my past, about last night, that was all true. Their food arrived, but neither paid it much attention. Alexander was grappling with conflicting emotions, anger at the possible manipulation, gratitude for her apparent belief in his innocence, and beneath it all, the unwelcome realization that despite everything he was still intensely drawn to her. If you're investigating this, he said finally, then you know how dangerous it could be. These people destroyed $1 billion company to get to me. What makes you think they wouldn't do the same to a journalist who gets too close? I'm careful, Sophia replied, and I have protections in place. What protections? She hesitated, again. I have copies of documents, records that trace the flow of money, communications between certain board members. Nothing conclusive enough to publish yet, but enough to serve as insurance. Alexander's mind raced. If what she was saying was true, she might hold the key to his exoneration, but it also made her a target. I want to see these documents, he said. I can't show you everything, she responded cautiously. Not yet. But I can show you enough to prove I'm telling the truth. They finished their dinner in a strange limbo between tension and intimacy. Sophia avoided further questions about her investigation, steering the conversation toward safer topics. Despite his lingering suspicions, Alexander found himself once again captivated by her intelligence, her quiet wit, the way she listened, as if truly interested in his thoughts. After dinner, they walked together through the Brooklyn streets. The night was cool, stars occasionally visible between the gaps in buildings. Eventually, they reached her apartment building. Would you like to come up? She asked. Just to talk, she added quickly. I can show you some of what I've found. Alexander knew he should refuse. His attraction to her was clouding his judgment, creating vulnerability when he needed to be on guard. Yet he found himself nodding, following her up the stairs to her book-lined apartment. Inside, Sophia went directly to her desk, unlocking a drawer with a small key she kept on a chain around her neck. She removed a flash drive and handed it to him. "This contains some of my research, enough to show you I'm serious, but not everything." Alexander took it, their fingers brushing. "Thank you for believing I wasn't involved." Sophia's expression softened. "The evidence never pointed to you directly. It was too perfect, too convenient. In my experience, real corruption is messy. This was surgical." She moved to her kitchenette and prepared tea while Alexander connected the flash drive to her laptop. What he found left him breathless. Financial records showing transactions he had never authorized, emails he had supposedly sent but never written, board meeting minutes that had been subtly altered. "How did you get these?" he asked, scrolling through document after document. "I have my methods," Sophia replied, setting a steaming mug beside him, "and sources who want the truth to come out." Alexander looked up at her, new respect mingling with his other complicated feelings. "This is incredible work. With this, my lawyer might be able to—" "It's not enough," she interrupted. "Not yet. These documents show discrepancies, but they don't prove who's behind it all. For that, we need more." "We?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. Sophia met his gaze, steadily. "Yes, we. I can't get access to everything I need on my own, and you can't clear your name without my help. We need each other." The proposition hung between them, laden with implications. Working with her would mean trusting her completely, despite the unorthodox beginning of their relationship and the many questions that remained about who she really was. "Before I agree to anything," Alexander said carefully, "I need to know everything. How you became involved in this, who your sources are, what your real interest is in all of this." Sophia took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "My real name is Sophia Reeves, not Morgan. I use different names for different articles to protect myself." Alexander tensed. "Reeves? As in—" "Yes," she said quietly. "Lawrence Reeves was my father." The name hit Alexander like a thunderbolt. Lawrence Reeves had been a small-time investor who had lost everything in a market crash 5 years earlier. He had publicly accused several major financial institutions, including Reed Financial, of market manipulation. No one had taken his claims seriously. He had been dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, a failure looking for someone to blame. 6 months after his accusations, Lawrence Reeves had taken his own life. Alexander stared at Sophia, understanding, dawning. "You blame me for what happened to your father." "I did," she admitted. "For a long time I was convinced you and others like you had deliberately destroyed him. I started investigating financial firms, looking for evidence of the manipulation he had claimed existed." "And did you find it?" Alexander asked, his mouth suddenly dry. "Not exactly. What I found was something much bigger, a pattern of targeted attacks against specific individuals in the financial world. People who had something in common, though I haven't figured out what yet." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "And then I realized you were next." "You knew this was going to happen to me?" Alexander asked incredulously. "Before it happened?" "I suspected," Sophia corrected. "I had noticed similar patterns of activity around other executives before their falls. When I started seeing the same signs around Reed Financial, I tried to warn people, but no one would listen." Alexander's mind was reeling. If what she was saying was true, it meant the destruction of his company wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern, a systematic targeting of financial leaders. "Why didn't you come to me directly, before all this happened?" Sophia laughed without humor. "Would you have listened? A freelance journalist with a personal grudge against financial executives, claiming there was a conspiracy to destroy your company. You would have had security escort me out of your building." She was right, and they both knew it. The Alexander. Reed of 6 months ago would have dismissed her claims without a second thought. "So instead you found me at my lowest point," he said, a new understanding dawning. When I had no choice but to listen. I didn't plan our meeting, Sophia insisted. I had been tracking the story, yes, but running into you that night was genuinely a coincidence. And everything that happened after, Alexander asked, his voice low. Was that also coincidence? Sophia moved closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. Nothing about what happened between us was part of my investigation. That was real, Alex, unexpected and complicated, but real. Alexander wanted to believe her. Despite everything, her connection to Lawrence Reeves, her hidden identity, the calculated way she had withheld information, he found himself drawn to her still, perhaps even more intensely now that he understood the depth of her determination. If we're going to work together, he said finally, there can't be any more secrets. I need to know everything you know, and I need to know it now. Sophia nodded slowly. There's one more thing you should know, something I discovered just yesterday, after you left. She hesitated, seeming to weigh her words carefully. The person coordinating the attacks against you, the one who orchestrated the entire scheme, I believe it's Eleanor Wright. The name struck Alexander like a physical blow. Eleanor Wright, chairwoman of the Reed Financial Board, his mentor for over a decade, the woman who had guided his career from his earliest days in finance, the woman who had demanded his resignation with cold efficiency. That's not possible, he said automatically. Eleanor has been with me from the beginning. She invested in my first fund when no one else would. She's been like family. That's what makes her the perfect architect, Sophia replied gently. She had access to everything, knew all your blind spots, and had your complete trust. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing the small apartment. His mind raced through years of memories, Eleanor's guidance, her support, the way she had championed him to the board. Had it all been a lie? A long con leading to this moment? I need proof, he said firmly. Not speculation, not patterns, hard evidence. That's what I'm working on, Sophia said. But to get it, I need access that only you can provide. Alexander turned to face her, suddenly aware of the precipice he stood upon. Trusting Sophia meant betting everything on a woman he barely knew, whose initial interest in him had been professional rather than personal, who had concealed her true identity. Yet his instincts told him she was genuine in her desire to uncover the truth, whatever her original motivations might have been. What exactly do you need from me? He asked. Sophia's expression was a mixture of relief and determination. Access to your personal files, communications with Eleanor going back at least 5 years, and your help arranging a meeting with someone who might have crucial information. Who? Eleanor's former assistant, Marcus Daniels. He left Reed Financial 3 months ago, right when the irregularities would have been implemented. I think he knows something, but he's disappeared. With your connections, we might be able to find him. Alexander considered her request. Giving her access to his personal communications was a major risk. Those files contained sensitive information about deals, clients, his personal life. But if she was right about Eleanor, the risk was necessary. All right, he agreed finally, but we do this together, every step. Sophia's smile was small but genuine. Together. As they began planning their investigation, neither noticed the small blinking light of a surveillance camera hidden within one of Sophia's bookshelves. A camera that had recorded their entire conversation, transmitting it to someone who had been monitoring Sophia's activities for months. Someone who now knew exactly what they were planning. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, Eleanor Wright watched the live feed on her tablet, her expression unreadable. Beside her, a man in an expensive suit shifted uncomfortably. They're getting too close, he said. We should shut this down now. Eleanor shook her head slightly, a thin smile playing at her lips. No, let them continue. They're leading us exactly where we want them to go. And if they actually find something? If they connect you to... They won't, Eleanor interrupted confidently. Because they're looking in the wrong direction. By the time they realize that, it will be too late for both of them. She closed the tablet, ending the surveillance feed. The pieces were in motion now, moving toward an endgame that neither Alexander nor Sophia could possibly anticipate, an endgame that would test not only their newfound alliance, but the unexpected feelings growing between them. The next 2 weeks transformed Alexander's life in ways he couldn't have imagined. By day, he maintained the facade of a disgraced executive cooperating with investigators. By night, he worked alongside Sophia, piecing together the elaborate conspiracy that had destroyed his company. Finding Marcus Daniels, Eleanor's former assistant, proved challenging. He had left no forwarding address, closed his social media accounts, and seemingly vanished. It was only through Alexander's connection with a former security consultant that they finally located him, living under an assumed name in a small town in Vermont. "He's scared," Alexander observed as they drove north on the interstate. "Whatever he knows, it frightened him enough to disappear completely." Sophia nodded, reviewing her notes. "According to the timeline I've put together, Marcus left Reed Financial exactly 2 weeks before the first fraudulent transactions were backdated into the system. That can't be coincidence. The question is whether he was involved or whether he discovered something and ran." The autumn scenery blurred past their windows, trees ablaze with red and gold, quaint towns that seemed worlds away from the cutthroat environment of Manhattan finance. Alexander glanced at Sophia in the passenger seat, struck by how much had changed between them. Their initial attraction had evolved into something deeper as they worked side by side, sharing takeout dinners in her apartment surrounded by documents and leads. He had given her complete access to his personal files, and she had reciprocated with all her research. The trust between them, forged in unusual circumstances, had strengthened with each revelation they uncovered. The most troubling discovery had been a series of encrypted messages between Eleanor and an unnamed contact, discussing what they called the succession plan for Reed Financial. Alexander had found these messages buried deep in his company email archives, messages that had been deliberately hidden from him, but that his executive access had preserved. "What still doesn't make sense," Alexander said as they approached their destination, "is why Eleanor would do this. She already had immense influence at Reed Financial. The board respected her. She didn't need to destroy me to gain power." "Maybe power wasn't the motive," Sophia replied thoughtfully. "Remember the pattern I found? Other executives targeted in similar ways. There has to be a connection we're still missing." They found Marcus Daniels living in a modest cabin on the outskirts of town. When they pulled into his driveway, they saw him through the window, his expression changing from confusion to alarm as he recognized Alexander. By the time they reached the door, he was attempting to flee through the back. "Marcus," Alexander called out, "we just want to talk. We know you're in danger." The words stopped him, 1 foot already out the back door. "You don't know anything," he replied, his voice tight with fear. "We know enough," Sophia said, stepping forward. "We know about the succession plan. We know you left right before it was implemented. And we know you're hiding from the same people who destroyed Alexander's career." Marcus looked between them, calculation visible in his eyes. Finally, he closed the back door and gestured toward his living room. "You have 15 minutes. Then I want you gone." Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished, but meticulously organized. Marcus Daniels himself seemed diminished from the confident assistant Alexander remembered, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and a wariness that suggested he hadn't truly relaxed in months. "I didn't have anything to do with what happened to you," Marcus began defensively. "I discovered what they were planning and got out before they could silence me." "Who is they?" Alexander asked. "Eleanor and who else?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Eleanor is just a soldier. She follows orders like all the others." Sophia leaned forward. "Orders from whom?" Marcus hesitated, then moved to a bookshelf and removed a hidden compartment. From it, he extracted a flash drive. "This is everything I managed to download before I left. Emails, financial records, meeting transcripts, things I wasn't supposed to see." "Why haven't you taken this to the authorities?" Alexander asked. "Because the authorities are compromised," Marcus replied grimly. "At least, certain key people." "This goes higher than you realize, Mr. Reed, much higher." He inserted the flash drive into his laptop and pulled up a document, a list of names and companies. Alexander recognized many of them, executives who had fallen from grace in various scandals over the past 5 years. These weren't isolated incidents, Marcus explained. They were calculated removals, parts of a larger restructuring of the financial industry. Restructuring by whom? Sophia pressed. Marcus scrolled to another document, a complicated organizational chart with familiar names in boxes connected by lines of influence and control. At the top of the chart was a name that made Alexander's blood run cold: Jonathan Pierce. Pierce Global Holdings? Alexander asked incredulously. The investment firm? The holding company is just the public face, Marcus said. Pierce is real. Power comes from his connections. Political, financial, international. He's been systematically targeting competitors and reshaping the industry according to his vision. But why target me? Alexander asked. Reed Financial wasn't in direct competition with Pierce's companies. Marcus looked at him with something like pity. Because of Project Helios. The name struck Alexander like a thunderbolt. Project Helios had been his most closely guarded initiative, a revolutionary financial technology platform that would have democratized investment access, potentially disrupting the entire industry. How do you know about that? Alexander demanded. That project was compartmentalized. Only 5 people had full knowledge of it. And one of them was Eleanor Wright, Sophia realized aloud. Marcus nodded. She's been Pierce's informant for years. When she learned about Helios, she recognized the threat it posed to Pierce's control of the market. Your company had to be neutralized, and you had to be discredited so thoroughly that no one would back your next venture. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Alexander had trusted Eleanor implicitly, sharing with her his most visionary ideas. She had betrayed that trust, feeding information to Pierce and helping orchestrate Alexander's downfall. There's more, Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. Pierce doesn't just want to control the financial markets. He's building something bigger, a system that would give him unprecedented influence over global financial regulations. How? Sophia asked, taking rapid notes. Through a network. They've compromised officials, strategic investments, and proprietary technology. They call it the Consensus, a new financial order with Pierce at its center. Marcus glanced nervously at his watch. You need to go. I've already said too much. Come with us, Alexander urged. With your testimony and these documents. No, Marcus cut him off firmly. I'm leaving the country tonight. If Pierce discovers I've spoken to you, nowhere in. America will be safe. He ejected the flash drive and handed it to Alexander. The encryption key is Phoenix 7219. Use this wisely. And remember, you can't trust anyone in your former circle. Anyone. As they drove back to New York, Alexander and Sophia sat in stunned silence, the implications of what they'd learned sinking in. It wasn't just about Alexander's company or career. It was about a fundamental restructuring of power in the financial world, a silent coup that few had recognized. Your father, Alexander said suddenly. Lawrence Reeves. Could he have stumbled onto this? Sophia nodded slowly. His accusations about market manipulation, they weren't specific to Reed Financial. He talked about a coordinated effort across institutions. No one believed him because it sounded too conspiratorial. But he was right, Alexander said quietly. And it cost him everything. Night had fallen by the time they reached the city. Alexander suggested they go to his apartment rather than Sophia's. If they were being monitored, her place was likely compromised. In the safety of his penthouse, they began analyzing the contents of Marcus's flash drive. The encryption key worked, revealing thousands of documents detailing Pierce's operations. The scale was staggering. Dozens of companies systematically undermined, executives strategically removed, regulatory decisions influenced through a network of well-placed allies. We need to take this public, Sophia said, her journalistic instincts kicking in. With these documents and our combined testimony. It won't be enough, Alexander interrupted. Pierce controls too many media outlets, has too many allies in regulatory bodies. We need irrefutable proof of his direct involvement. Sophia looked up from the laptop, a new determination in her eyes. Then we create a trap. Use what Pierce doesn't know against him. What doesn't he know? That we know about him, she said simply. As far as Pierce is concerned, you're still focused on Eleanor as the mastermind. We can use that misconception. Alexander considered this, his strategic mind engaging with the problem. We make Eleanor think I'm closing in on her. She'll reach out to Pierce for protection or guidance. And we monitor that communication, Sophia finished. Catch Pierce giving orders directly. It was risky, but it was also their best chance. Using Alexander's remaining tech connections, they set up surveillance on Eleanor's communications. Then, through carefully orchestrated leaks, they let it be known that Alexander had evidence implicating her in the fraud. The response came more quickly than they anticipated. The very next evening, their monitoring software detected an encrypted call from Eleanor to a restricted number. Thanks to Marcus's decryption keys, they were able to listen in real time. He knows. Eleanor's voice was tense. Not everything, but enough to cause problems. How? The male voice, presumably Pierce, was cold, controlled. I don't know. He's been working with Lawrence Reeves's daughter, the journalist. They must have found something in the company records. A brief silence. This is becoming messy, Eleanor. I don't like mess. I can handle it, she insisted. Just give me time to... Time is a luxury we no longer have, Pierce interrupted. The consensus launch is in 3 weeks. Reed needs to be completely neutralized before then. What are you suggesting? Another pause. Come to my office tomorrow, 8 p.m. We'll finalize the contingency plan. No electronic communications about this from now on. The call ended, leaving Alexander and Sophia staring at each other in the dim light of his living room. The consensus launch, Alexander repeated. That must be the culmination of Pierce's plan. And we have 3 weeks to stop it, Sophia added. No, Alexander said, resolution hardening his voice. We have 1 day. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., we'll get the proof we need. The plan they devised was audacious. Using Alexander's knowledge of high-security buildings and Sophia's investigative skills, they identified vulnerabilities in Pierce's corporate headquarters. With help from one of Alexander's former security chiefs, someone he trusted implicitly, they developed a strategy to access the building and record the meeting between Pierce and Eleanor. The next day passed in tense preparation. By evening they were ready, disguised as maintenance workers with counterfeit credentials that would get them access to the service areas of Pierce Tower. Are you sure about this? Sophia asked as they prepared to leave Alexander's apartment. If we're caught, you could face real charges. Your legal situation is precarious enough already. Alexander took her hands in his. I've never been more sure of anything. This isn't just about clearing my name anymore. It's about stopping someone who thinks he can manipulate markets and destroy lives with impunity. Sophia's eyes searched his face. When did this become your crusade? Maybe when I met a journalist who never gave up seeking the truth, even when no one would listen, he replied softly. Or maybe when I realized that my life of wealth and power had been built on a system that men like Pierce could corrupt so easily. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of connection that transcended their initial attraction or their allied investigation. Without words, they both recognized it, acknowledged it in the brief kiss they shared before heading out into the night. Pierce Tower loomed over the Manhattan skyline, its gleaming facade a testament to the power and wealth it housed. Their credentials got them through the service entrance without issue, and they made their way to the maintenance level directly below Pierce's executive suite. According to the building plans, Alexander whispered as they navigated the utility corridors, there's an access panel that leads to a ventilation shaft. It should put us directly above Pierce's office. The access panel was where the plans indicated, but reaching the ventilation shaft required navigating a narrow space between walls. Sophia, smaller and more agile, took the lead, with Alexander following close behind. I can see into the office, she whispered back to him. It's empty now, but there's a perfect vantage point for the recording device. They positioned their equipment, a high-definition camera and directional microphone, both transmitting to a secure server that Alexander's security contact had set up. Now all they could do was retreat to a safe observation point and wait. At precisely 8 p.m., they watched through the remote video feed as Jonathan Pierce entered his office. Alexander had never met the man in person, but his reputation preceded him. Brilliant, ruthless, with political connections that spanned parties and borders. In person, he was surprisingly unassuming. Average height, impeccably dressed but without ostentation, his power evident only in his bearing and the confidence with which he moved. Eleanor arrived minutes later, her usual poise visibly strained. "This better be worth interrupting my dinner, Eleanor," Pierce said without preamble. "What exactly does Reed know?" "He's been gathering evidence about the systematic dismantling of his company. He knows it was deliberate and he suspects I was involved." Pierce waved a dismissive hand. "Suspicion isn't proof. And even with proof, who would believe him now? His reputation is destroyed." "You don't understand," Eleanor insisted. "He's working with Sophia Reeves, Lawrence Reeves's daughter." For the first time, Pierce's composure faltered slightly. "The journalist? How did that connection happen?" "I don't know, but it's a problem. Lawrence Reeves was getting too close before we neutralized him. His daughter might have inherited his research." Alexander felt Sophia tense beside him. The implication about her father's fate was clear, and her hand found his in the darkness, gripping it tightly. On screen, Pierce moved to a bar cart and poured himself a drink. "The consensus launch cannot be delayed or compromised. Too many pieces are already in motion, too many influential people committed." He turned back to Eleanor. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We need to discredit both of them completely. I've prepared documents that will implicate Reed in not just financial fraud, but personal impropriety. As for the Reeves woman, we can link her to extremist groups, suggest her investigations are politically motivated." Pierce considered this, then shook his head. "That's not sufficient. We need something more definitive." "Such as?" "Such as evidence that they were conspiring to commit corporate espionage against Pierce Global Holdings. Evidence so compelling that both would face federal charges," he smiled thinly. "Evidence that my security team will discover when they apprehend both of them breaking into this very building tonight." Alexander and Sophia exchanged alarmed glances. Somehow, Pierce had anticipated their move. "They're here?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "My security detected unusual access to the maintenance level an hour ago. They're being monitored but allowed to proceed. I wanted to confirm your involvement with Reed before taking action." Pierce pressed a button on his desk. "Security is moving to apprehend them now. By morning, they'll be in federal custody, facing charges that will ensure neither is ever taken seriously again." Alexander grabbed Sophia's arm. "We need to go. Now." They abandoned their observation post, racing back through the utility corridors toward the service exit. Behind them, they could hear the heavy footsteps and radio chatter of security personnel. "This way," Alexander urged, pulling Sophia down a different corridor than the one they had used to enter. "There should be an emergency exit at the end of this hallway." They burst through the door into an alley behind the tower, alarms blaring behind them. Alexander led Sophia through a maze of side streets, using his knowledge of the city to evade pursuit. "He knew we were coming," Sophia gasped, as they finally slowed their pace, several blocks away. "How?" "It doesn't matter," Alexander replied, grimly. "What matters is that we got everything we needed." Despite the chaos of their escape, the recording device had transmitted the entire conversation to their secure server. They had Pierce on record discussing the deliberate destruction of Reed Financial, acknowledging the neutralization of Lawrence Reeves, and planning to frame both Alexander and Sophia. "This is it," Sophia said, as they reviewed the footage. "In the safety of a hotel room they had booked under false names. This is what we needed." But Alexander was quieter, his mind working through the implications. Pierce was right about one thing. He has too much influence. If we just release this to the press, he'll find a way to discredit it, or us. Then what do we do? Alexander's expression hardened with resolve. "We don't just expose Pierce. We Expose the consensus, his entire network. We need to identify everyone involved and release all the evidence simultaneously. The next week passed in a blur of strategic planning. They moved constantly, never staying in one location for more than a night, using burner phones and cash only. They combed through Marcus's files, cross-referencing them with the new evidence from Pierce's office, building a comprehensive picture of the consensus and its participants. The list was shocking. Banking executives, regulatory officials, media, moguls, politicians from both parties. Pierce had spent years building his influence, positioning key allies in strategic positions across the financial landscape. The consensus launch is in 12 days, Alexander noted as they worked. Whatever Pierce is planning, that's when it happens. Then that's our deadline, Sophia replied, determination evident in her voice. They reached out to trusted contacts, journalists from competing publications known for their integrity, former regulators with untarnished reputations, tech experts who could verify the authenticity of their evidence. Each was given a piece of the puzzle, with instructions to publish simultaneously when given the signal. 2 days before the consensus launch, they were ready. From a secure location, Alexander and Sophia initiated the protocol they had established. Within hours, the story broke across multiple platforms, documented evidence of Pierce's conspiracy, testimony from witnesses including Marcus Daniels, speaking from an undisclosed location abroad, and the damning recording from Pierce's office. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Financial markets fluctuated wildly as investors processed the implications. Pierce Global Holdings stock plummeted. Government agencies launched emergency investigations. The participants in the consensus scrambled to distance themselves or make deals for immunity. Alexander and Sophia watched it unfold from a small cabin in the Catskills, the same television networks that had vilified Alexander, now hailing the exposure of the conspiracy as the financial story of the decade. "We did it," Sophia said softly, the weight of years seeming to lift from her shoulders. "My father's vindicated. Your name will be cleared." Alexander took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "This is just the beginning. Exposing Pierce and the consensus creates a vacuum in the financial world. What matters is what fills that vacuum. What are you thinking?" His eyes held a spark she recognized, the visionary who had built Reed Financial, but tempered now with hard-won wisdom. "Project Helios, my platform for democratizing investment access. Pierce was right to fear it. It would have undermined the kind of centralized control he was building." "You want to restart it," Sophia realized. "Not just restart it, reimagine it. A financial system built on transparency and accessibility rather than insider influence." He paused, studying her face. "But I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands the value of truth, who knows how to communicate complex ideas to the public, someone who won't let me forget what really matters." The question hung unspoken between them. Sophia's expression softened, but uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "Alexander, these past weeks, what's happened between us happened under extraordinary circumstances. In the real world—" "This is the real world," he interrupted gently. "Right here, right now. Everything else, the wealth, the status, the power games, that was the illusion." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking because I need your skills for my new venture, though I do. I'm asking because somewhere between that bar and this moment, I fell in love with you." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, hung in the air between them. Sophia's eyes widened, then softened with emotion. "I've spent years pursuing truth," she said quietly, "building walls to protect myself from being hurt again, never letting anyone close enough to see the real me." Her fingers tightened around his. "But with you, those walls came down, despite every reason they shouldn't have, despite who you were, despite my suspicions, despite my fears. You found your way past them." "Is that a yes?" Alexander asked, his voice hopeful. Sophia's smile was answer enough, but she put it into words anyway. "Yes, to all of it, to Helios, to building something better than what came before, and to us whatever extraordinary circumstances the future might bring." As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, the news continued in the background. Reports of Pierce's arrest, of Eleanor Wright turning state's evidence, of regulatory agencies pledging reform. It was the end of one era in the financial world and the beginning of another. For Alexander Reed and Sophia Reeves, it was also a beginning, a partnership forged in crisis and conspiracy that had evolved into something neither could have anticipated when they met in that dimly lit bar. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond strengthened by the truth they had fought to uncover and the future they now sought to build. Outside the cabin, snow began to fall, covering the autumn landscape in pristine white, a blank slate, a fresh start, a world of possibilities stretching out before them. Dear listeners, we hope Alexander and Sophia's journey of redemption has moved you as deeply as it moved us. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest falls can lead to our most meaningful transformations, and that truth, however deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the light. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist with equally compelling narratives. You'll find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities and the resilience of the human spirit. What would you have done in Alexander's position? Would you have risked everything for the truth? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.